How do you see the kind of change in the opposition?
Well, for example, you're talking about somebody that needs to be removed from the gene pool.
He has openly admitted that this case is not about getting compensation, it's about sending a message. And it's not just a message to Greenpeace, which had virtually no role, but it's really to the climate movement and to all activists. Greenpeace is simply a stand-in for all of us who try to hold corporations accountable for abuse.
Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up. Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. Delighted to be joined by human rights and environmental attorney Stephen Donziger, who most of you know. If you don't know, was railroaded by Chevron and I think the U.S. government, and unfortunately was between house arrest and actual prison, detained for over 3 years. Now you're a free man, fortunately, and you are in North Dakota. We are now almost a decade since the historic Standing Rock protests that swept the world, really. But unfortunately, the oil company behind the Dakota Access Pipeline is now suing Greenpeace, the longstanding environmental group, for $300 million, essentially claiming Greenpeace initiated or organized Standing Rock. The jury selection in that egregious case has begun. That's why you're there. Tell us, before we get to the nitty-gritty of the trial, you and many other lawyers are there doing monitoring. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so, there's a tradition in, lots of countries around the world when there's a trial that raises serious issues that look like, problems, fair trial problems, political persecutions, weaponizing the courts against political opponents, governments, and in this case, a corporation, that, groups of attorneys get organized and go monitor the trial and do a report on the trial, both during the trial and after it's over. And oftentimes the presence of prominent attorneys in court, and we've organized a bunch of really prominent attorneys to come here to, a pretty isolated town called Mandan in North Dakota where this trial's happening. They've come here. Marty Garbus, the great human rights attorney, represented Nelson Mandela and Václav Havel, among others. Natalie Segovia, probably the leading indigenous rights lawyer in the United States. Jeannie Mirror, who's the president of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. Terry Collingsworth, who's a big human rights lawyer, done some big cases against corporations around the world. These people are all formed this committee to have a presence in court out here. This is a 5-week trial, and it has all the telltale signs of a SLAPP lawsuit, meaning a lawsuit that's designed by a corporation to harass and intimidate an opponent rather than litigate an actual legal claim. So that's what this case is. We're out here. Some of us are out here. We're going to be rotating through, over the 5 weeks, but so far, what we've seen is extremely disturbing. I'm really glad we're here, and we are dedicated to telling the world about what we're witnessing.
And, for those that don't know the origins of Standing Rock, contrary to what, Energy Transfer, which is the owner of the pipeline, is trying to spin, this was a indigenous youth-led movement that started before even the camps started. Young members of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe lobbied the White House to shut down the Dakota Access Pipeline. And then these camps began. I don't even think Greenpeace was involved until later. I was on the ground there in 2016, then 2017.
So where you're seeing the police, whether it's state police, DAPL security, they're on top of a giant mountain that is where their ancestors are buried, the Native Americans. Did they give you a warning that they were going to make?
Oh, not at all. Sitting there with my hands up, and I told him I love you, and the guy came and sprayed us. They sprayed me in the face for probably 6-7 seconds, and I just stood there until they were done.
I saw a Greenpeace activist, but they certainly weren't organizing it. Can you take people into this warped argument that the company is making, that Greenpeace somehow was the organizer here?
So basically, the company's argument is, in my opinion, preposterous. I mean, it's a bunch of hot air. And it's wrong that this case has gotten this far. This trial should not be happening. It should have been dismissed a long time ago because, again, it's not a legitimate case. I mean, the company's theory is that Greenpeace is somehow responsible for the entire Standing Rock protest. And let me tell you one simple fact to illustrate how utterly preposterous that is. Greenpeace, over a period of a few weeks, had 6 people there, but there were 100,000 protesters. As you point out, it was indigenous led by the Standing Rock Sioux. They put out a call way like in July, August of 2016, when this was really getting going, to all the indigenous groups around the country and world to come join them in resisting this pipeline. 300 indigenous tribes came to stand in solidarity with the Standing Rock Sioux. This was an indigenous-led protest, but there were also allies there who were not indigenous. Greenpeace sent a handful of people. They had like virtually no impact. They helped winterize a camp. They had a truck with solar panels to help provide power to one of the encampments that was out there. And they did some training in nonviolent civil disobedience. So why is Greenpeace being sued? Well, this is sort of what's very clear about this case. Kelsey Warren, who's the founder and chairman of Energy Transfer, he's worth between $6 and $7 billion. He's a huge supporter of Donald Trump. He's a right-wing ideologue. He once said that all activists should be removed from the gene pool.
So, Kelsey, you've been seen a lot of experience in the pipeline business. How do you see the kind of change in the opposition?
Well, for example, you're talking about somebody that needs to be removed from the gene pool. We had people drilling holes in our pipe, drilling holes.
He has openly admitted that this case is not about getting compensation. It's about sending a message. And it's not just a message to Greenpeace, which had virtually no role, but it's really to the climate movement and to all activists. Greenpeace is simply a stand-in for all of us who try to hold corporations accountable for abuse. He's blaming Greenpeace because why? They've been around 50 years. They've had incredible successes in fighting polluters and protecting our environment for decades. And also, they have chapters in 40 different countries. Kelsey Warren's theory is if he can win this case against Greenpeace, he will be the hero of the right-wing, fossil fuel movement, and he'll look like some sort of good guy. And it's really, I think, being done out of a lot of personal spite. I do not think a company that had rational decision-making and professional management rather than ideologically driven management would ever do this case. And by the way, it's been going on since 2017. Greenpeace has spent probably tens of millions of dollars on legal fees over the years. The first case, a RICO case in federal court, similar to the one Chevron did against me, was dismissed as a SLAPP lawsuit in 2019. Within weeks, Kelsey filed a pared down case in state court, which is where we are now. And that's this case that finally went to trial this week. And it has defamation claims and all sorts of, I think, just hot air types of claims. It's shocking to me the judge let it go forward. But this is, in my opinion, I mean, no disrespect to North Dakota, but this is probably, and they admit it themselves, the biggest trial that's ever happened in the state. Judges in North Dakota are not used to these types of cases. And I think the state court trial judge, who seems like a decent enough guy, but he's never done a case like this. He admits it. He has no help. He has no clerk. He has no court reporter even. The Gibson Dunn lawyers, it's the same law firm again that Chevron used to detain me for almost 3 years. I should say illegally detain me after we won the Ecuador pollution case. They're the lawyers. They have 15 lawyers in court, and they're running the courtroom. I mean, they're pretty much, in my opinion, overwhelming the judge. And there's 2 things that are really disturbing, watching the trial. Number one is the jury. Every single person on the jury has a tie to the oil and gas industry. We sat through 2 days of jury questioning. This is a county that is 97% white. It's heavily pro-Trump. It's heavily white Christian nationalist, and it's heavily fossil fuel oriented. You can't get a fair jury in this county. And Greenpeace repeatedly asked the judge to move it to a different venue, and he refused. And, there are decisions like that that sort of come under the procedural aspects of a trial that the public never sees. So, like, by the time you roll around to court and there's like a jury in the jury box, as happened today, like, no one really understands that jury is not fair. Okay. And they
Right.
can't be. Every single person on the jury's livelihood depends on that pipeline, or at least the industry, functioning and thriving. So,
Well,
like, I'd say
North Dakota is the number 2 behind Texas oil producing state in America. So,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. And naturally, there's no Native American on the jury. And we sat there for 2 days watching 66 jurors be questioned. There was exactly one Native American who was immediately dismissed from the jury pool. So it's sort of, with Marty Garbus, who's litigated dozens of trials in Mississippi over the years. He's 90 years old, and he's a brilliant trial lawyer. And his observation is this reminds him what's happening here in North Dakota in this trial reminds him of the kind of racism that you would often witness in Mississippi, still probably witness in many parts of the American South and elsewhere, where you can't get a fair jury. I mean, you basically had black defendants in criminal cases constantly being judged in death penalty cases by all white juries. Okay, and here you have an organization that is dedicated to supporting indigenous peoples being judged by a completely non-indigenous jury in a state that has a significant indigenous population. It's just unfair. And you see it in the courtroom. There's a lot of secrecy. The judges refused to open up an existing live stream to the public, refused to open up the live stream to the media. There's no court reporter. There's no daily transcripts available. The courtroom's tiny. And to watch the trial, you got to be here physically. I mean, hell, I live in New York. Okay, this trial's going to go 5-6 weeks. So I'm here for the first few days. I got to go home. I got stuff I got to do. There's no reason I can't watch a live stream that exists in North Dakota, and he's making available just to the lawyers of the two parties, but not to the public. This is a state that regularly televises its trials. Court TV recently televised 2 homicide trials from North Dakota. So why suddenly is the judge capitulating? And I think it's because of pressure from Energy Transfer. I think they're embarrassed for the public to see what's going on in this courtroom. All they want is quietly to get a very quick, monetary judgment from a jury that's tainted in an unfair courtroom without anyone knowing about it. And then they want to waltz around the world saying, look what we did. We beat Greenpeace in court. And people won't understand how it happened, that it really was a rigged trial. And believe me, Jordan, I mean, we go way back. Like, you came to my house when I was detained in another SLAPP case filed by Chevron to retaliate against me for my work helping Amazon pollution case. Know what this is like. So, I mean, you know what this is like as a journalist. You've covered these types of stories. This is probably the mother of all corporate SLAPP suits against an environmental organization. I think my case by Chevron was probably the mother of all SLAPP suits against an individual. This is the one against an environmental group. And just like mine was intended to intimidate other lawyers and campaigners from being, too successful in holding industry accountable at a high monetary cost, the one against Greenpeace is really designed to intimidate other environmental groups from, going after the industry for committing abuses that pollute the environment or, lead to global warming or somehow, destroy the planet. And
right.
we are in I would say, a reflection point in the climate movement right now, with global warming accelerating. Trump is now in power. It's drill, baby, drill. We have a few years left before the whole operation goes over the tipping point. And here we are in a little town in North Dakota, which is really ground zero of the conflict between the environmental movement and the fossil fuel industry. It's happening in Mandan, where I am right now.
Right.
And it's just extraordinary to see it play out. They want it to look like just a regular trial, but what it really is a massive showdown between the environmental movement and industry playing out in a courtroom. And listen, man, the reason I'm here and the reason I'm on your show is I want the world to know about this. People need to get engaged. go to Greenpeace's website on the trial. It's called greenpeaceontrial.org. And then separately, we have a trial monitors. That's the group I'm involved with out here. It's an ad hoc trial monitoring committee. We're just pulled together. We got some funding and we're here. And that's at trialmonitors.org. And we have a little website, has our basic information. Go there and learn about it, see the materials, see our statements, and continue to follow this.
And I'd like to ask you, you mentioned that this is much bigger than North Dakota. You know, a lot of people think the rule of law has suddenly been weaponized under Trump, but since Standing Rock, and I believe as a result of Standing Rock, we saw laws being pushed by Republicans in many states to basically allow drivers to run over protesters and, get off, essentially. It's not a crime to run over a protester. They phrased it differently, but that was essentially the bill. You've had efforts to add felonies for chaining yourself or physically obstructing critical infrastructure. They've even tried to call this eco-terrorism, pipeline protests, many of which are indigenous led. So this seems to me to be a recurring pattern to basically try to stop another Standing Rock from ever happening anywhere over anything. And does this trial seem to continue that pattern?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say that, as the climate movement grew and got stronger, and Standing Rock was a true inflection point, okay? As justice movements got stronger in the United States, the murder of George Floyd, a true inflection point, there was a concerted effort to organize a reaction. And part of that is some of these new laws that the fossil fuel industry in particular was pushing that would lead to sentencing enhancements for like super low level crimes if they took place at oil installations, on the theory that oil installations were essential to the U.S. national security. That is, if you protest peacefully at an oil installation and you trespass, and if you go to Walmart and do the same thing, when you go to Walmart, you get a summons. And when you do it at an oil installation, you face an 8-year prison sentence. That's what some of these laws do. They impose draconian prison sentences to punish speech at particular places. So the oil industry and the fossil fuel industry more generally has succeeded in getting a lot of state legislatures to create new laws with very severe punishments for protesting at industry sites. And that has provided a legal basis, I would argue an illegitimate one, but a legal basis to allow courts to punish the hell out of environmental activists and start sending them to jail for 2, 3, 4 years in acts of protest that before were never led to jail. Worse was like a fine or a sentence of probation. So, you have that happening within the context of the criminal law. And then in the context of civil law, where companies can sue for money, you have the Greenpeace case. You have the Chevron case against Stephen Donziger, after I helped Amazon Communities win a $10 billion pollution judgment. And these cases are extremely dangerous. They trample really on the First Amendment, and they're designed to intimidate those of us, myself included, Greenpeace included, who have grown a little too strong and influential in influencing people around some of these critically important issues. They hate it. They hate us. They hate me. I mean, and the crazy part, Jordan, is really interesting to me. The law firm that Energy Transfer hired to try to destroy Greenpeace is the same law firm Chevron hired to sue me under RICO and have me detained in the nation's first private corporate prosecution for almost 3 years, both in my home and in prison. Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher. Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher is marketing these illegal SLAPP lawsuits to corporations that will enable them to attack and try to destroy various climate groups and activists. And the crazy thing, and there's not enough attention paid to this, the legal profession, that some of these corporate law firms are allowing themselves to be used by corporations to launder these illegal cases through their, through the esoterica of the law, through their reputations as good law firms. so they can attack climate activists and groups like Greenpeace. Like Gibson Dunn plays a vital role in the whole scheme. Energy Transfer could not do this case without Gibson Dunn willing to do it for them. And I will say this, it's a business model in the legal profession. I would estimate Gibson Dunn has billed over the last several years of doing this case well over $100 million. It's, Energy Transfer, I guarantee you, is one of the biggest litigation clients of this very large law firm. And this case is a huge moneymaker. And even though this case is totally full of hot air, and I believe it is, the claims are preposterous. Like one of their claims is Greenpeace, it was unlawful for Greenpeace to meet with the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund and try to educate them on what the Standing Rock Sioux thought of the DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline. That was unlawful because it led to the Sovereign Wealth Fund divesting from the pipeline. And that, according to the company, is tortious interference in their business operations.
So
So,
they could do unlimited lobbying, and that's legal, but
of
Greenpeace
course,
can't. Okay.
of course, it's all designed to criminalize advocacy. That was what Chevron tried to do to me as a lawyer. And that's what Energy Transfer is doing or trying to do to Greenpeace. I mean, can you imagine a legal theory that an NGO can't meet with a bank, give them information about one of their investments that might lead them to conclude it doesn't adhere to their human rights standards, leading them to divest from that investment, and then the NGO is committing a crime for meeting with them? And that's their theory, one of their theories in this case I'm watching here. It is preposterous. It's a direct assault on the First Amendment. It is designed to weaken the entire climate movement. And it is designed ultimately to destroy Greenpeace. Now, final thought, as I know we have limited time, and let me just say this. Not all is lost. I actually have a feeling watching this after 2 days, even though I think Greenpeace has virtually no chance of winning this trial with this biased jury in this biased courthouse in the middle of North Dakota. There's something happening, which is a lot of reporters have shown up. We've been publicizing this. You're focusing on it, and people are realizing this is yet another example of the abuse of the legal system by corporations against the climate movement. It's raising awareness. It's raising consciousness. Greenpeace is gaining a lot of support, and even though I think Greenpeace will lose this trial, it's not the end of story legally. They then will appeal to the North Dakota Supreme Court directly because North Dakota is such a small state. The only appellate court is the Supreme Court. There's no intermediate court. Go right up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court in the state, even though it's a Republican-dominated state, actually has a very good reputation for being fair. And I believe this case will not survive more than 5 minutes on appeal. It's just so obviously full of hot air. But the sad part is that in a SLAPP case, a SLAPP harassment lawsuit, again, a lawsuit designed to intimidate and silence critics rather than litigate real claims. In that kind of case, the victory for the perpetrator is just getting into trial because it's so expensive. There's so many depositions. There's so many subpoenas. There's so much heartache. There's so much agita. I mean, Greenpeace must have 10 executives who've had to take their valuable time and fly in from Amsterdam and Washington, okay, just to sit in the gallery and watch this fiasco. The distraction to Greenpeace, the distraction to the staff. It's unquantifiable. Not to mention the fact they're paying millions in legal fees to a very able law firm to handle this in a completely biased courtroom. So the victory for a perpetrator in a SLAPP is getting the case going, surviving the initial motions to dismiss, getting into depositions, sucking the money out of your adversary, getting them into a trial, trying to criminalize their behavior. And all of that is happening, even if ultimately Greenpeace prevails, as I believe they will. So the way we turn these around as a movement is we, first of all, get engaged, learn about it, and support Greenpeace and spread the word and call it out. Call it out loudly, publicly, consistently. It's the only way to deal with this. You can't get sucked in. Oh, I hope Greenpeace wins the trial. Then you're just legitimizing an illegitimate trial. You got to
Right.
call out the damn trial every time you talk about this case.
Right.
Greenpeace is getting screwed by this judge and this jury in this small town in North Dakota. They're handling it beautifully. I mean, they really are. They're fighting it, okay? But they're fighting it somewhat in isolation because this place is so isolated. That's why we're here. And I'm calling attention to this, as are all the other monitors, because we really believe we can really turn the tables on energy transfer if enough people engage.
And last thing I'll say, because I know you got to go, I want to bring this back to what this is all about. I know a big oil company, initially it was going to go through, the pipeline was originally going to go through not far from where you are. And then because the white folks there said, no, we don't want it in our backyard, they rerouted it on top of Standing Rock, basically. That's what really this is about. It's beyond environmental racism. And I think what Energy Transfer is trying to do, in addition to chill the First Amendment, intimidate, try to deter people from protesting in the future, they want to take away the ownership of this historic movement. They want to, it's an additional slap in the face to Standing Rock and the indigenous people to say, oh, they didn't really start it. It was really this, Greenpeace who organized the whole thing.
Yeah, you're right. That's a great point. It's racism. It's racism. This was not a Greenpeace protest. Why are they being sued? Okay, they're being sued. Look, think about this. This is indigenous territory. Okay, it was settled by colonizers. Indigenous peoples were put onto reservations. It's the American story, guys. Okay, and the fact is, the pipeline, you're right, was moved from being near Bismarck, which is the state capital, more populated, more politically powerful, like about 50 or 60 miles south, where it just cuts right on the edge of the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. But the land it traverses, even though it's not technically on the reservation, is historic Standing Rock Sioux unceded ancestral land. Okay. And it's a complete violation of the rights of the Standing Rock Sioux, who have not consented to this pipeline being on their land. And by the way, there's a report that the judges sealed that shows there were at least 700 toxic leaks of fluids from the pipeline into Lake Oahu, which is the main water source for the Standing Rock Sioux, as well as millions of other people in this area, not just indigenous people. Okay.
Yep.
And the judge has sealed this document from the public, but it's devastating. It actually proves that what the fears that the protesters had, the Standing Rock Sioux and their allies back in 2016 and 17, are being borne out every day. This pipeline is traversing ancestral lands without the consent of the indigenous peoples whose lands they are, and it's polluting and causing major health risks for everyone in this area, indigenous and non-indigenous. And they just waltz into court and sue the people who are calling them out for it. I mean, and the craziest part is Greenpeace, the people sitting in judgment of Greenpeace are all white people. I mean, who work in the oil industry. It's just the most extraordinary sight. It's like, it really is like Marty Garber says, like Mississippi with all white juries judging black defendants.
Yep.
It's just, you're gonna get convicted no matter what the evidence, because of reasons having nothing to do with the evidence.
Right.
It's really hard to watch, but you know what? It's good to be here and call it out. It actually makes us all feel good, and we're gonna keep talking about it.
We all owe you. Thank you for trekking out to North Dakota. I think it was -20 last week. So thank you.
The crazy part, it was -40 last week, literally a low one day. And today it was 50 degrees. Go figure.
Unreal. Thank you. Everybody go to Greenpeace, also greenpeace.org. They have plenty of information and ways you could support. And thank you for you and the other attorneys that are there. And I'm going to stay on this story. Like you said, the trial will go on for 5 weeks. It might be a foregone conclusion, but we have to blare the sirens regardless. So thank you, Stephen Donziger.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.